director of the Witch Studio at Edinburgh University, because we've metamorphosed from the Centre for Timber Engineering into several other centres trying to promote innovation in the use of timber. But I'll go on quickly here. Now, I think you've all got instructions on your table to learn how to Twitter and tweet if you don't already do that. So it's obviously part of BRE, CBE for you, if you get to do some educational things this morning. I know that on the screen, along the way today, there will be various questions come up that will be tweeted to us. So if you forgive me if I don't take them immediately, because we have other speakers that we want to hear what they have to say. And if we can introduce each of them in turn. I'd like to call Peter Bonfield back to the company chairs. But also his background was quite an inspirational talk there. And it was really refreshing to see the emphasis on innovation in the Olympic development. And in a way, there are many, many lessons from that for us here in Scotland. But if we can call up the second of the speakers here, Professor Sean Smith. Sean's a colleague of mine in the university, and Sean runs a different institute, the Institute of Sustainable Construction. We have 9 institutes tied to different areas of Scottish government and economic policy. And the Institute of Sustainable Construction has several centres in it, Building Performance Centre, Centre for Offset Construction and Innovative Structures, a whole range of skills and services to the construction industry in Scotland. Third, Graham Ogilvie. I'm not sure where. Graham. Graham is the Chief Executive of Construction Skills Scotland. So there's a whole area here just to do with the skills we need here in Scotland. And if I can then call in Gary McGregor, Director of CCG, Managing Director, I should say. Let's give me his full title. CCG, I think, are probably one of the more innovative construction companies in Scotland, certainly in the world of timber frame, closed panel construction, and we run a world-class operation. So I think we're a good mix of academic research and consultancy, training skills, and contracting and development skills here. So what I want to do is move on to really the first of the questions. We're going to try to initially go back to the theme that was set for the conference today, and that's really to do with the carbon issues. And so I have a series of pre-prepared questions. But please, if you have questions, we'll take them as we go along, and if other questions appear on the screen out of the blue, I'll try and take them as well. I'm not so familiar with doing that, so you have to bear with me. So the first question really for the panel, and I think if I can separate the questions so that we don't get kind of similar responses, I think what I'd like to do is if Peter could address the questions from the point of view of larger businesses and their supply chains. And if Sean, you could look at the questions in terms of SMEs for developing innovative products and systems and technologies. And if Gary could come at it with the point of view of contractors and house builders, because I know you'll punch your weight in that one. And obviously Graham from the point of view of what kind of training do we need to move things forward. So the first question really here is for all of you, take you in turn. In the current economic climate and the associated reduction in activity within the construction industry, do you think this does or does not provide the best foundations for developing Scotland's low-carbon construction industry? And what immediate activities could or should we be considering if we're to have any hope of meeting the CO2 reduction targets for 2016? So that's quite a long question, but it's really about saying, are we set for it? Can we do it? And how are we going to do it? So, Sean, you're looking eager.
Well, I think firstly, let's look at the first targets in 2020. There's less than 2,000 days, working days, before 2020. And I think that's a big task. And we hear the ambitions of a policy of 42%, which marks us out on the map, which other countries around the world are looking at. But it also puts us on the map that if we've said we're going to deliver it, then we have to deliver it. And listening to Professor McDonald's presentation this morning, I think that encapsulation of the sort of almost, rather than even smart cities, but smart communities that collectively could potentially deliver some of those reductions seem very attractive in pinpointing where those are. In terms of the carbon reduction commitment, particularly for the SMEs or in fuel poverty, the carbon reduction is almost, as someone else mentioned, Peter mentioned earlier, it's almost the last thing on your mind just now, and that's understandable. I think carbon targets are very tough. I think it will be extremely difficult to deliver 42% by 2020.
The Glasgow was only aiming for 30, so.
Well, I saw that, so I'm glad you raised that, yeah. But having said that, I think it's 30%, but in a collective of many others, potentially Glasgow will.
But do you think, though, I mean, it's one thing to say we must all innovate, but do you think there's enough incentive? Or, what's the carrot at stake here? Because the stick's regulatory. We've got that, we know where we're going, we know what we have to hit. Where are the carrots?
Well, actually, we don't have a stick, because Section 7 is optional. It's not compulsory. And that actually leaves a caveat for the next 5 to 6 years of how can we deliver something for 2020 if Section 7 sustainability on new build, whether it be existing housing, newly built housing, or in the future non-domestic new build, is non-compulsory. So I actually don't think we have a stick directly. Sorry, maybe speaking out of turn, but perhaps that's the reason.
No, maybe ask Peter then to say, okay, the innovation in the Olympic Park, if you look at it from the point of carbon issues, okay, the carrot there was really big contracts for a lot of people, but there were a lot of small contracts as well. And I think what you explained to the procurement chain there perhaps made it possible to achieve some of those things. And Fergus, you talked this morning about procurement and how it might be changing. Do you think some of the lessons from the Olympics could be applied here, or do you think there's a willingness to receive them? We should have spoken to 2 ministers this morning.
Yeah. Yes. So, I mean, certainly I feel that this morning was really open, completely open to thinking, thoughts, suggestions on how Scotland might do better here. And it's not just green things, it's also about the competitiveness, the austerity measures, doing more for less, encouraging investment and export, so creating innovation that's exportable south of the border, which is a target, but also for the field. They're all very high level, they're all very high level phrases, aren't they? But underneath that, it's really practical and pragmatic. So precisely what would you do with procurement to unlock what outcomes? And so I don't know the government here very well, but I do know, and the second minister was clearly very open and looking for ideas which things really important. But then at the end of the day, I know from ODA, and I know from the work done at BRE with the regulation part, for example, one of the key requirements of getting the outcomes was setting really clear goals. Absolutely clear, required goals and performance outcomes that people then have to work towards, and never wavering. And I think one of the things that, picking up on Sean's point is to say, well, what can government require? What can they require in terms of performance outcomes that help unlock some potential? But it's not just government, it's also the private sector. So, companies that are here buy things, deliver outcomes. What can they do too if you can get that movement going?
The goals need to be clear. You talk about the OTA, you're talking about one site, one project. What we're talking about here is a country, how you get the goals clear across the board.
Well, take over several levels, great policy system. Code level 6 by 2016, or you don't build. Very clear message. You do it how you want to do it, but you do it, or you don't build new houses in. Now, that's a clear target, and that unlocks all sorts of outcomes. And the thing too, the other difference between the past and the future, what if are we set for it? Not yet. And we might not be, but if perhaps we can be. How are we going to do it? We're going to do it by having the right performance targets, but also thinking about the green things alongside how you do best business, do best societal outcomes. Then you stand a chance of people want to do it more and more and more because it's better for their business.
But that needs to also feed down to the skills we need, which will come on to Graham here, really, because clearly the goals are important in order to understand what the skills requirements.
Yes, I mean, the scale of opportunity is absolutely immense. But what slightly concerns me is we talk too much about new build. Retrofit is going to be the main game in town. But the problem you have with the companies is that they're looking to survive, many companies at the moment. There are some companies, CCG included, that are very innovative and can do great things here. But if we're actually going to make a difference and look to the growth companies of the future, that's the micro businesses. 97% of Scottish companies have less than 50 employees. you need to incentivise these companies, and you need to incentivise, as was said earlier, the domestic market. Otherwise, it just ain't going to happen. So there are too many companies out there watching the bottom line, trying to survive. Now, if we look at some of the approaches, and I would recommend a client-based approach from construction skills, obviously, working with the SFT and the hubs, it's how that actually comes down the supply chain. If that comes down the supply chain and actually impacts on these micro businesses, not just SMEs, then I think you might see something making a difference here. But you've got to get these people into this game, and I'm sorry, but I think a lot of companies have too many other worries when they get involved in this.
Well, let's reverse that a little bit, because you said these companies are all 50 people or less. So they're focused on just surviving. So, but you mentioned things in Scottish Futures Trust. So how do we help, or how does the government help them understand that better, how to get involved in these kind of areas of procurement, where there are opportunities, where there potentially are areas of funding that they're not getting from the banks?
Yeah, I mean, this comes back to the ease of getting into that supply chain. So procurement has got to be a pretty easy option for these small companies. Too many of these companies see procurement as a major obstacle. So whether it's PQQs or whatever it happens to be, some of them don't quite understand that. And you really need these companies to grow if you want sustainable economic growth in Scotland.
But do you think then that government and local authorities are doing enough to change the procurement process, or enough to do it quickly?
I think, as in everything, they're looking at it, they know what the problems are, whether they're flexible enough and can change it quick enough. Local authorities, I have to say, 6 local authorities in Scotland have signed up also to the client-based approach. So I think there is a change in attitude. But as in all things like this, the construction industry can't wait. It needs to be done very, very quickly.
So that's a no then. So that's the question for the ministers then, is 100 people to write down for Alex Neil, we need to change the procurement process. Gary, where are you coming from on this? Because obviously there's questions started about carbon. We moved a little bit into training. I know you do a fair amount of that in your company, but where you see the work coming from, where you see the incentives, and where you see the challenges in terms of regulatory barriers, if you like.
Well, it's a big question.
Sorry.
All that together, but and it's fairly complex. First of all, public procurement, that is becoming extremely difficult to work through. We are, for those who don't know CCG, and I promised I wouldn't turn us into CCG sales pitch when I was on the stage, but we turn about £130 million a year, we employ 650 people, we are a heavy employer of apprentices, modern apprentices, we have 80 odd apprentices as in the trade world. But our staff in 3 years went from 1 person dealing with simply PQQ to approximately 6, and our turnover hasn't increased, it's stayed the same. If anything, it's dropped slightly because of the market. So if businesses with 50 type tradespeople or employees, I don't quite know how they see through that, because it's a huge obstacle, and I appreciate it's got to be there, and quality's got to be there, but it's a huge issue. Going back to carbon reduction, and it's interesting what Peter had mentioned in his earlier address. Construction is largely inefficient. I mean, we don't profess to be the best. CCG, we think, by sheer force, that we're one of the vanguards of looking at that, but construction is largely inefficient. I think 7%, we've got statistical data that would prove it's actually more than that from some of us say. So first of all, you've got to get it right at the first stage. In terms of reducing carbon, it does require investment. It does require significant investment by the companies. Our business, over the last 3-4 years, have invested £10 million, a further £5 million going in next year to make us, if you like, at the vanguard of the industry. But we need support. We need support from the central government, local government, Glasgow City Council, etc., because without that, we like most businesses will fall off the cliff. Carbon agenda in terms of the building regs, the best thing that's happened is that the building regs have been introduced. It is a wee bit disappointing that Section 7 wasn't made mandatory, because again that will force people down the line of looking at it, the supply chain looking at it. We are also involved in the Commonwealth Games, as an example. We are one of the parties to the Commonwealth Games. They are going to be 60% carbon reduction on it, but actually with the introduction of the CHP laws, we can almost be carbon neutral. But that took 2 years of planning to effectively get that to the stage where we did it just now. With a lot being done, with various parties coming in to it. And again, if construction is to maintain a level of productivity, simply isn't enough time to do that. And the growing curve and the cultural difference, the cultural awareness and getting there is extremely difficult. The other aspect in terms of the supply chain and the new suppliers that are coming forward, again, a very, very relevant point that Peter has made. All too often we simply do not have enough time. The Commonwealth Games 2 years ago we were saying we've got plenty of time here. It's now a bonus. We start in January. Could we have done things better? Absolutely. Have we got a good, robust solution? Absolutely. But we could have done some things a lot better. And often what happens is we are stifled by the regulations that go behind planning, building control, Scottish water, etc., etc. And again, it was interesting what some of the speakers said this morning about overcoming that in the future, because if we have to overcome it, there's got to be a whole lot more joined up thinking.
Just picking up on the planning, in Glasgow we had this 2-4-1 mantra, which wasn't like a position of centre-forwards and building. It was plan 2 years, build 4 years, practice 1 year. And we spent 2 years planning, which was unusual. But the 2 years of planning, we know, materially impacted positively on what we did during the 4 years. So if we hadn't spent that time, we would have got anything like the outcomes we did. So it's just supporting your need to spend time planning. Again, the other main point is in the planning, if you say that's where we're going, how would you do it? Rather than saying that's where we're going, this is how you do it. You can come up with all sorts of ideas you have thought of. Ask people how to, rather than tell people what to.
Okay, we'll leave the question of bisection siblings and mandatory to a little bit later. We've got a historic moment here because we apparently had our first tweet about from somebody somewhere. I think it'll be up on the screen. Ready? Now, which one is it? Should we just take them all there? Sorry? All right. We'll get it on screen. So, construction in Scotland. Does the panel share concerns that the Green Deal has been rushed through without being thought through? Who'd like to take a shot at that first?
Well, I mean, what...
Peter.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So, is it being rushed through without being thought through? I think it's being, well, Thistle is a set. It's not agreed exactly what it is or how it's going to work. And
does everyone know what the Green Deal is? Oh, there's a hand over there, right?
So the Green Deal is very good. If you all know what it is, perhaps you can tell me. Perhaps you can tell the government what it is. But the Green Deal is really looking at a way of enabling retrofit of enabling retrofit in a way that works financially. The precise mechanisms about how that happens are still to be worked out. So I think we haven't, or the government hasn't really worked out what it is yet, and they are really, really thinking intensely about what they need to do to get it right. They're working for something.
Yeah, the government haven't thought what it means, how we assess its impact on skills. And you don't know what skills are required, it's retrofitting either.
But I think you did allude to it, in terms of saying if retrofit is going to be the big deal as opposed to the Green Deal, that you need to have some idea of what the skills are for retrofit, because the range of buildings actually have don't all require the same solutions.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've obviously got the issue of pre-1919 houses, solid wall insulation. The concern is, and I was talking to Ian actually over coffee, I think it was, and we were discussing, cavity wall insulation, and people just felt that was suitable for all housing types. Of course, it's not. And there's a major issue with this. If you start getting the cowboys into this part of the industry with actually understanding what skills are required and have proper training, then it could have disastrous consequences in households. And then you've got the problem, the Green Deal, whatever the Green Deal is, just goes down in the tubes because people don't read it.
We're not getting a lot of positive response to that
No, it's
question.
too about the Green Deal. The Green Deal, I hope the Green Deal will work without the need for government finance. So if we think through it in the right way, we'll have enough content so that people can understand. If I spend £3,000 on my home replacing the windows and the internal insulation, this is a likely kickback I'll be able to get. Or if it's a housing authority that has loads of homes, they can look at the investment plans and have an understanding of the energy savings that will rise. Or if it's a financial investor or a pension fund, same thing. And we need to be clear on what the best measures for building are. We need to be sure that the products perform in the way that's modelled. We need to make sure they're installed by people who are competent and capable of doing so. So that when these things happen, if it's my house, I want to be sure that the product's going to work, and it gets saved on my energy bill, and it's going to be done by people who aren't going to ruin my house so that you're giving minimum interventions. And if you come back to my story about the International Sustainability Alliance, the large real estate owners who were looking at the capital budget for their offices and factories and shops, at one extreme you've got those people, and at the other extreme you've got me as a household who just wants to do something to reduce my energy bill. And if you get that right, then the intervention will the key thing is, for your point, is getting the right specs in specifications so you do the right thing on the right house. That means you've got to survey it right, you've got to model it right, and look at the different approaches. You need to be confident what the outcomes will be. You've got to be confident the product's performance is credible, and that the people doing it are capable of doing it the right way. And then it will work. And you might need to kickstart it as a government, but you shouldn't have to go to the finance it, because that's not sustainable.
But I'm not actually sure we know the right spec for the right houses. And that's the big issue. So how can you actually look at training?
No, and that's what BRE does. They do a huge amount of research to build tools that allow people to model that.
Sean, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I think the existing stock is still important. This Green Deal model would work if we're bringing in a lot of this funding strategy that effectively avoids it.
Yeah.
The only issue is, what I'm picking up from the Green Deal just now is, we are understanding just now that many of the multinational companies and major UK companies in the FTSE are looking at the Green Deal. And yet we haven't actually got the cold face of, we've never even stratified the Scottish housing stock into all the specific remedial measures, like the 284,000 affordable block, the 250,000 traditional tenements. There's data out there, but it hasn't been encapsulated together for us to say, these are the 2 or 3 different options we can utilise. So at the moment, the multinationals who are planning how they're going to invest in the Green Deal without knowing what the solutions are going to be. But the SMEs who are physically going to deliver, hopefully, the products for that, are at the moment not yet being fully included in the discussions with the multinationals. So it could well be, if the Green Deal was to take off, many of these products actually may not even be sourced from the UK. Because you're buying mineral waters now from China at half the price of what we can produce up in Scotland. So, as an example, that is a case in point where we have to know, one, what is the stratification of the different house types in Scotland, and the suitable payback and remedial measures on those house types, and then that supply chain across Scotland.
But when you say we have to know, what does that mean? You mean that's an area where the government can take an initiative to actually commission the research or the collation of that material that exists?
Yeah, and I think that should happen like 18 months ago. But if it could happen tomorrow, and that started to be pulled together, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so there's another action that we can talk about here. Okay, let's, if we can move forward a little bit, we've got some more questions here. So if I take it up, back up onto the carbon issue again. The question we have here is, carbon offsetting is now a well-established, recognised financial mechanism. Apart from actually managing these funds, does the panel think that investments made from carbon offsets will in the near future become a significant part of the funding for Scottish construction projects such as housing or town centre renewal? Languages.
I don't like this at all. I think after a meeting with the ministers, watch this space. So watch this space, because one of the discussion topics we had was with a number of partners, actually from the Liverpool project, to develop what's called a carbon reporting framework. And the intention of the carbon reporting framework is the large corporates who look to offset their carbon as part of the corporate social responsibility, offset it into a fund which allows investment in UK projects. So normally one would invest in projects in China and India and other parts of the world. But we've developed a framework whereby that can be done within our shores. And that's very attractive to large corporates because their customer base is often in these sorts of countries. They want to do something more locally that works for them. So, and in fact, our first partner to sign up to this is British Airways. Depending if I British Airways next year, you'll be able to go onto the website soon. And when you buy your ticket, there's something called the One Destination Fund. If you tick that box, I don't know, £5 or something like that from your ticket sale, goes into this fund. And the purpose of that fund is to fund UK projects. And it may be one of the things, one of the actions we have Horizon this morning is to think about, well, how and could and how might that apply in Scotland first to help finance some of these retrofit projects.
I think carbon might be a safer currency than the euro at the moment, but I think going forward, a lot of people invest in gold over the last 5 or 6 years, just in the price shooting up. But actually, some people in the future, if the carbon price and the carbon value continues to increase, and it doesn't fall down like it did a few years ago, then it could well be the second currency that's happening, which companies will then trade off or invest into as part of the offsetting. And I should mention that Kickstart, the Glasgow capabilities in the 7 universities, is providing all the valuable information on the retrofit stuff and some of the improvement mechanisms. But it does need to be supported further and expanded. And that would give us some of that information, which then supports how we carbon offset and maybe some of it or applying into that.
I think though the implication here is that there's we have a fund that's a UK fund, and a part of that fund might come to Scotland, and a part of it might go into retrofits or whatever. Is then, do we somehow have a mechanism for allocating part of that to training or supporting companies to learn more about how to do retrofit? There's a lot of intangible joints.
I think the framework for offsetting stays local may well work. And dealing with Scottish ministers for some time, you have this dichotomy between UK and Scotland, and just what does that mean? And I think that's going to be an issue. We've heard the Scottish Government talk about the socio-economic benefits from contracts, and we obviously, the contractors out there have looked at some of the Northern Irish companies coming in, particularly the school project in the Western Isles. And it's a major issue, I think, for the Scottish Government at the moment, socio-economic benefit of contracts, and how they can actually assess that and still award these contracts. And I think offsetting is going to come into that as well.
Okay.
I may be the voice of the not here, I've got to say, but offsetting just simply as an agenda. With absolutely cold face fact, no client of ours, and they're the largest social housing building in Scotland.
So the commissioners for what I'm talking to you about.
Just something that isn't there. I mean, it doesn't form any part of any PQQ, it doesn't form any part of any documents that are in client briefs, but it does need a strategy put out by the Scottish Government about how to introduce it. It's interesting what you were saying earlier about the That's effectively what's required, a clear guidance about how to take it forward, because it is required, but just something that isn't there just now.
So what Gary's saying is exactly right. Of course, nobody's heard about it because it hasn't happened. The question is, could it happen? And the other interesting thing here too is, the downturn happened. A lot of these large corporates, to improve their liquidity, get cash into their businesses, sold the carbon they had at bottom price. And there's going to be a demand for carbon credit to come through. The question is, the other interesting thing is I saw Alan Eric in London, Boris, about this. Of course, he's really interested in the gains on trying to capture some of this funding, putting it against some of the money that developers have to pay if they're not going to meet their carbon targets. So there is a fund as development fund, but also putting it alongside pension funds and others that are looking at investing in retrofit because they think they might get a return. And so the Great London Authority are looking very carefully at how they do those three things together to try and provide funds that help expedite retrofit. Because they're not doing it either. So I think it'll be a new thing. It's a big area of nature stuff. There are ways
announces a 50% reduction in the feed-in tariff for PV systems, which was announced this week. Suddenly, all these pre-calculations have been done, all have to be reset. And that wall of money that's been talked about, where we're going to be landscaping the roofs of social housing, affordable housing, local authorities, housing associations across the UK, I mean, that's all set back because people are now rejigging the figures, working out actually which system will we now utilise regarding that. So that moving goalpost really doesn't help, and it doesn't help either the new build sector, which are looking to deliver and attract people to new build housing because they're going to have lower energy costs. And now they can't have that effect on our part.
And that's why I think the whole energy efficiency rather than energy generation thing is good to think about, because, you know, rather than relying on technologies like power, which is important, let's think also or first about how we invest in stuff that's built into buildings, that stays, that doesn't need maintenance or doesn't go wrong, that reduces demand in the first place. And let's try and structure some sort of deals around that so you get a return on that. And if I mean anything, it's what we can build up a turbine thing for various reasons, and we took the money from that and we invested. We still need to get the carbon performance. So we took the money and we invested in 3,000 homes, retrofitted in 5 boroughs around Hull, which have high levels of food poverty. And we've also invested in measures in 12 schools. Now what they will do is they will reduce the energy costs. And in schools, our measure success is not going to be carbon, but it's also how many more teachers they can employ as a consequence of having to spend less on energy. So, and that comes back to the point I was making before. At the end of the day, the key with these investments are, we shouldn't need, if they're going to pay off, we shouldn't need government finance to make them work. They should work because the energy savings and the cost savings equation is attractive.
It may be providing people who raise the money to do the investment and do things that will save them money. I think, well, we've got a few minutes left, so I think probably we'll take all these points. There's been a lot of great points come out of it, but we'll throw you the $64,000 question, which is if the Scottish Government were to implement a single action to stimulate activity and sustain growth in the construction industry, what should that action be?
I.e., if they had funding, what would it be?
Well, Peter was just describing a way of doing things without funding. But I think it's whether there are political mechanisms you can do things. I think we can, perhaps with funding, perhaps with imagination, perhaps a series of innovation at the political level.
I would want them to invest or direct everything into housing. I would like as many new homes built as possible. We have 153,000 households with housing waiting lists. It's probably going to rise to 250,000 by 2050. It's 10% of the household population as well. So we really desperately need to do something. And if that means bringing planners into one room with local authorities, with housing associations, with CEPA and others, and saying how best can we use the land that we have, how we look at the planning rights, how we look at single type approval systems, give us some quick guidance, or maybe not too quick, we get it wrong, but some specific structured planning guidance on these various sites which we can accelerate that development. So if there is that wall of money, or if there is an investment funds which will invest in housing, we are ready to deliver that huge approach.
So what you're basically saying is that by 2060 we want all the agencies here to be like the Olympic Development Authority at one time and be singing from the same hymn sheet. Would that be a summary of it?
And having delivered that 150,000.
Okay, that's fair.
As long as we can deliver.
Sorry?
As long as we can deliver.
A vested interest spoke out. Perhaps you want to expand on that a little bit, Gary?
Well, I think that again there is a variety of, it's not one solution solves all. Certainly the planning process that we have is really cumbersome. And again, if you flip the switch and say you want processes by a certain time, something to take too long. The average period is 15 months. The harsh reality from inception to a spade in the ground is 15 months in terms of our work. Very, very rarely be short than that. So that's a period something that's installed in the process. The management requirements of building regulations is a fantastic thing. But again, there needs to be more joined up thinking about how to deliver that, because the supply chain out there, again, see that as an opportunity quite rightly to use the system to make money. And again, this fabric first approach is something that built-in solutions is is absolutely key. The Commonwealth Games again is 30 to 35% built into the actual value of the cabin, so we haven't made for a really, really high spec solution. But there needs to be absolute clear guidance from the government, which I fully appreciate. The funding is extremely tight. I don't think we are addressing the cost to build houses of the future now in terms of the bounties that are available, in terms of sort of bringing in private investment, as we mentioned. That all too often right now is the words are not even on that front. So there needs to be absolute clear guidance.
Graham, do you think, given what Gary just said and Sean just said, the kind of targets that were set out, do you think we've got the mechanisms in place to create the skills to build houses in less than 15 months?
First of all, I would say I don't necessarily agree with Sean that we put all the money into housing. You'd expect me to say this. We need to look at other things in infrastructure. Particularly keen, obviously, with my background in marine civil engineering, I'd be looking at hydro, I'd be looking at tidal, I'd be majoring on tidal, in actual fact. So I think that's a no-brainer. But from a training point of view, no matter whether it's housing or it's infrastructure, I feel we have a restrictive approach to training. There's a restrictive approach to the funding of training. This has got to be freed up, become more flexible. So industry should be deciding where that money goes. That you should not be restricted to a certain amount of funding if it's a youth, certain amount of funding if it's an adult, certain amount of funding if it's a level 2, certain amount of funding if it's a level 3. I mean, as we develop more and more training frameworks, and modern apprenticeship frameworks, for example, say in anchor drilling, which would be at a level 2, that's a very expensive framework to deliver. Whereas highways maintenance at a level 2 would be a relatively cheap framework to deliver. There's no recognition of that in the funding process for training. And I would suggest to the government, if they freed that up and actually let industry decide, then you'll get a bigger bang for the buck.
Peter, do you...
Well, first of all, some hot news.
Hot
But I'm really getting into this Twitter thing.
He's getting tweets and we're not.
No, it's just on this thing which I have a terrible habit with, I can never switch off. I've just had this text come up which says the Isle of Lewis has submitted a community project for the important framework. So what that means is, you know that thing I saw about carbon offsetting, BA money, so the first community that said we want some of this money to invest in our community is Isle of Lewis, which I assume is somewhere in Scotland.
We are just like telling you.
Well,
That's good.
it's very interesting because Dr. Alistair Allen, the skills minister, he comes from Scotland. So.
Didn't the principal of Strathclyde say much the same thing?
Anyway, so that's sort of press. No, I probably have about 10 things to do. The first one I think they should do. No, the first one is just unlock the inherent power of procurement across the country in all sorts of things. Unlock the power of procurement. The potential for procurement.
Well, we've missed out the other line, and I think that's a kind of clear message really from this particular conference to government ministers.